Hello, everybody, and welcome to Get to Know the HPO, our weekly Facebook Live series. My name is Abigail Richardson-Schulte, and I am composer in residence with the HPO. Today, I'm just delighted to have our principal flute player, Leslie Newman. Now, we'll start off today with Leslie performing a work by Hungarian composer Ernst von Dohnanyi. He was born in 1877 in Hungary, and he died in the States in 1960. Now, he was not only a composer, but he was also a pianist and a conductor. He was educated at the Budapest Academy. And in terms of piano, he really came down the line from Franz Liszt because his teacher was Franz Liszt's favorite student. And in terms of composition, he studied with a man who was a real disciple of Johannes Brahms. And so you can hear that in Dohnanyi's music. Now, as a young man, he made his way to Berlin, where he was an important piano performer and teacher. He had a position at the Berlin Hochschule for a number of years. He moved back to Hungary and then had a variety of important positions in Hungary, including director of the Budapest Academy and also director of a number of orchestras, including the Hungarian Radio Orchestra and the Budapest Philharmonic Orchestra. He was a great supporter of the works of his contemporary composers, including Bartók, but his own style and composition was much more romantic. Now, following World War II, he left Hungary, and this had many people blaming him for being a Nazi sympathizer. But in the years that followed, it came out that nothing could have been farther from the truth, that actually during World War II, in his positions with various orchestras, he was really protecting Jewish musicians and their families, and indeed he saved hundreds of them. And after this point, then he eventually made his way to the United States, where he became a teacher at Florida State University. Now we're going to hear a work he wrote almost at the end of his life when he was 82 years old. This was in 1959, and it is a Passacaglia. Now, a Passacaglia is an old style and form from Spain in the Baroque period, and it was typically written for keyboard instruments or polyphonic instruments, instruments that could play more than one note at a time, or a collection of instruments, because it was a series of variations over top of a bass line. Well, here we don't have that, obviously. We have a work for solo flute, well, which is quite unusual for a Passacaglia. So this essentially forms a theme and variations. You'll hear the theme right off the top. It's 8 measures long, and it fools us. It actually has all 12 notes. And from hearing this theme, we would think, my gosh, we're going into a modernist work, a 12-tone work, a serialist work. But with all of the 20 variations that follow, then we have the romantic style of Dohnanyi. And so now it's time for the performance. Let's welcome our HPO principal flute, Leslie Newman, as she performs Ernst von Dohnanyi's Passacaglia for solo flute, opus 48, number 2. Wow, we just heard Leslie Newman performing Ernst von Dohnanyi's Passacaglia for solo flute, Opus 48, number 2. Now, he wrote this for the daughter of a family friend. In 1948, he had a short residency at Ohio State University, and he became quite close friends with the president of the university, and every year after that visited once a year. Well, he wrote this piece for their daughter, Ellie, and he wrote to her afterwards, I must confess that I love that Passacaglia very much, and I would have been disappointed if you would not like it or would have found it impossible to play. So a very personal piece for Dohnanyi. So let's welcome Leslie back after that performance. Leslie, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. What a treat.
Hi, Abby. Thank you. I love that story about Dohnanyi writing this for Ellie Baker, a family friend. And in fact, he wrote this is Opus 48 number 2. He wrote his Opus 48 number 1 also for Ellie, which is an aria. And I love the story that apparently, well, Dohnanyi went back to Ohio University every year because he was so close with the Bakers, and also he was an artist in residence each year in the faculty. He worked there with the students. And Ellie was at a concert that he played. I'm sure she went to all the concerts, but it was a beautiful Brahms composition. I'm not sure which. He was playing piano. And she had said to him after, oh, I so wish that Brahms had played something, that Brahms had written something for the flute. And Dohnanyi said, well, I'm sorry Brahms didn't, but I'll write something for you. And so he wrote these 2 beautiful pieces. And he also, apparently, there are fragments of a flute quartet, which he didn't finish, but which would be awesome to see. I'm not sure how far along in the composition they are, and whether they could possibly be put together somehow. But
yeah,
anyway,
interesting.
so we're very lucky. Yeah.
We have some lovely comments for you, which you'll have to look at after, but certainly from some people we know, like Ryan Scott and David Yeager and Alan Clark, and somebody watching from Colombia here too. So thank you very much, everybody, for your comments. Lovely compliments for Leslie and her amazing playing. So check those out afterwards, Leslie. So is this...
Hi, everybody. Yeah.
Is this a well-known piece of the flute repertoire? I certainly haven't heard it before.
Yeah, it's really not. It's pretty unusual because apart from being, it's not the only Passacaglia written for the flute, but I mean, it is unusual to write in such a polyphonic genre for such a monophonic instrument. And also the fact that it's through composed, basically just 9 minutes of through composition, which is also a bit unusual. Even in our biggest flute sonatas, usually, I can't actually think of a movement that's longer than 9 minutes. So it doesn't get performed very often at all. I love it. The first time I heard it, I was living in England. I heard it on Radio 3, performed by William Bennett, and I was just astounded, and started, to learn it and have programmed it a fair amount when I have the opportunity since, and definitely taught it to my students. I've had different students learn and play the piece, but no, I haven't heard it ever performed by anyone else anywhere. So it's not that well known, but I think it deserves to be well known. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And musically, what draws you to it?
Well, I find it beautiful. I mean, it's such a palette of different colors. I find it a real challenge to try and bring out the theme in the midst of all the notes that are flying around. Well, I find that although it's virtuosic, it's very warm and very human. And I think I love those qualities about it. So.
And it seems to me that it is virtuosic and difficult to play. Could Ellie have played this?
I have really wondered a lot about Ellie because she's not someone I can find anything out about. I think she was a teenager at the time. I mean, I guess, there are, I'm sure she must have been able to play it because Dohnanyi complimented her on her playing of it. And she must have been a fantastic flute player for him to be inspired to write this for her.
True enough. Yeah. Now, this was quite special to have a performance from you from your home. How is it difficult, or is it different preparing for an online performance versus a performance in a concert hall or in a public performance?
Well, I know so many of my colleagues are dealing with this same new challenge. And so, yes, I'll speak for myself personally how it was different. I'm sure we're all finding different challenges. One thing I've never had to do before for a performance is buy a dozen donuts and bribe the people next door to stop construction for the afternoon.
But you were successful, obviously. It worked.
They were so nice. They said, "Oh, sure, we'll stop just between 12 and 1." But yeah, they've been working away on the house next door. And in other matters, I mean, Abby, you were with me for some of this, and also Aaron Hutchison. I want to just absolutely throw out a huge thanks, and I'm, I bow to your ability. Aaron is our amazing a stage manager at the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra, and also a master of sound and technology, and a wizard in all manner of things. But it took us several hours actually to just figure out how to get this platform to work, because I'm on my phone, I'm not on my laptop. My phone's newer, and so the mic, the camera are newer, but the app for the platform we're using was not. Anyway, they were, they're always bugs. Let's just put it that way. And so between Aaron and myself, we spent a fair amount of time trying different ways to get through, and we were at the point of giving up. And then sort of, like so often happens in these things, the last little thing we tried worked. So that's awesome. And Abby, also with you on Monday, we were trying different things, different ways to connect. And so those challenges I find, they're all new, and but it's it's great to learn new ways of connecting with people. The other thing is just, playing to the wall. But I can feel you all out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
yeah, you certainly have a lot of fans watching. That's great. And by the way, Aaron will be joining us. Fun though in this is that we get to have people asking you questions along the way. So for those of you that are watching, please feel free to ask Leslie in the comment section, and I'll pass that along to her and see if we can get it answered from you. We also have a survey that went out in advance, so we have some questions for you. And the first one is, do you have a practice routine?
Well, my practice routine is a little bit dependent on what I'm involved in. But right now I have time for my ideal practice routine. Sometimes I don't, sometimes it's somewhat truncated, but it always involves an element of sound. I always start my day with long tones and technique. Actually, I have these books always with me, and so I'll just show you. And what happened since my undergrad days, they're all falling apart, but they're sort of flute Bibles. So for tone, Dilla Sonarte, all the flute players out there are going to know these books and love them as well. My teacher, Julius Baker, put together these daily exercises for the flute, and he used to play them for an hour a day up until, well into his 80s. And I find them wonderful. I feel like if I'm going through those, I feel like my fingers know what they have to do. And the other book that I really love is this one, Tone Development Through Interpretation. It's by another great flute player, Marcel Moïse. He put together all these beautiful melodies from the like arias, and so pieces from different symphonic works or operas, and just different melodies to learn how to sing on the flute. So that's my practice. If I can get through a bit of each of those, and it depends on how much time I have, how much time I spend with them. But right now I'm playing for about 3 hours a day. And I mean, that feels great. That feels really good. Yeah.
Oh, that's great, actually, and that answers another question about what you're doing right now. Derek Stevenson asked, "What types of musical projects have you been working on at home with all the downtime?" So I guess you just answered that. And he says, "I have been digging out some of my old music I worked on with you, which has been very nostalgic but fun to play again."
Oh, I want to say hi to Derek. Derek, hi. I hope you're well. Yes, Derek did his master's degree with me at University of Toronto here, and now has an awesome job in the Royal Canadian Air Force Band. You're in Winnipeg. I think that's still where you are, Derek. And I'm glad to hear that you're, just having time to pull out music and play. And it's great to hear from you.
Mm. Yeah. Thanks for that, Derek. And we have two people that asked you about your favorite music to play. So your favorite piece for solo flute and your favorite orchestral piece.
I find questions like this really difficult because I kind of love it all. And I know I've answered you this before, Abby, that my favorite piece is always the piece I'm playing at the time. However, if I had to choose one piece from the solo flute repertoire, it would be and I'm thinking solo as in flute alone, it would be the Bach partita, our great A minor partita. And in the orchestral repertoire, I have to admit, it would be impossible for me to choose a piece or even to choose a genre. I think I'm lucky, and I know I'm not alone in being lucky this way, that it's just such a joy and such a pleasure to play this repertoire, and it's just all very dear to me, and also opera. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, could you tell us a little bit about your own flute?
Oh, I would love to. Yes. So my flute is made by the Brannan Brothers Flute Company in Boston. I've had it for a long time, actually. I've had it since 1993. Some flute players really do change flutes, and there are always new gadgets coming out with flutes, and people like to try them. I'm pretty loyal. Well, I'm very loyal to this flute. It's 14 karat gold tube with silver keys. And the silver keys make the flute a little bit lighter. It's still a lot heavier than a silver flute would be. And well, one interesting thing about this flute, or it's a story anyway that I love to tell, is that I was playing a concert in Halifax probably 3 or 4 years ago now. I don't remember. And so as I said, I got this flute in 1993. And this concert, yeah, whatever it was, maybe it was 2016, 2017. But a man came backstage after to speak with me, and he said, "Would you mind if I looked at your flute?" And I didn't know if he was an amateur flute player or what his interest was. And I don't generally hand my flute over to people after concerts, but somehow it felt fine, and I gave it to him, and he looked at it, and he looked at some specific things, like there are just certain ways that details are shaped on the flute. Anyway, he looked at it and he said, "I made your flute." And it was such an extraordinary thing. His name is Forbes Christie, and he used to work for Brannan Brothers, and now he lives in Nova Scotia in Shelburne. And he makes flutes. He has his own company. It's called Windward Flutes. So that was really unexpected and amazing. Yeah.
That's a great story. I love it. Now, a follow-up question here from one of our viewers. Daphne asks, is the sound different on a gold flute versus a silver one?
Well, the potential for sound is different, but it's going to depend on the player in every instance. I always I always like to remind myself and my students that 95% of the sound is us. A small part is the flute, so we can play around with all kinds of different metals and um, different mixes of metals. And flutes can be made up to 22 karat gold. They're platinum flutes, wooden flutes, um, and any number of alloys that you can imagine. But ultimately, the sound is us and our body and what we do with the air. And so if any different player will sound different on a gold or a silver flute, but in different ways. So the sort of the assumption is that people will sound warmer on a gold flute. There's something in the softness of the metal, even though it's a denser metal, and a bit more brilliance on the silver flute. But that's not always the case. I did a concert at the Live Labs at McMaster University a few years ago, and I played syrinx from behind a curtain twice, once on my gold flute and once on my silver flute, and people gave their feedback and guessed which flute I was playing. And it was really interesting because in the end, it was pretty much 50-50 split. People just couldn't tell.
Thanks for that. We have another question for you. In that, as a flute player, are you expected to play all of the different flutes of the flute family?
Yes, I think more and more nowadays we really are. Even if I have a position as principal flute in my orchestra, um, it's often the case that there will be piccolo writing in a principal flute part, but I also play with different groups, which uh, which is a joy for me. One of them being the Continuum Ensemble, which is an amazing contemporary group here in Toronto that I'm so delighted to play with. And in contemporary music, in music that's being written for us today, um, composers love to explore the flute family because the sounds are so beautiful in the alto and the bass flutes. And of course, the piccolo is so nimble and such a brilliant color as well. And each of them have their own, the things that they do best, I guess, in the contemporary world. So it's often the case, actually, quite often, I've had all four flutes on one concert. So yes, I would say nowadays we pretty much have to be comfortable with all of them. Now, I've never played the contrabass flute or the subcontrabass flute, but with the bass and the alto and my C flute and the piccolo, those are our regular visitors to my practice room.
So I suppose you have to have all of those then. So you have your own bass flute then.
I don't have my own bass flute. I have access to some very, very good bass flutes. So I'm lucky that I'm lucky to have access to them. But I don't have my own. But I have one when I need one. Yeah.
That's great. Now, one of our watchers, Heather, asks, she said she's interested in your students, since we had a former student of yours ask a question, and if you've had any students who have really made it, on the scene.
Oh, well, I mean, I think the world of all my students. They're all doing amazing things. And I feel like they've all made it. In the music scene, you're asking, yeah, that's tricky. And I'm not sure, you I can just name some colleagues that I work with often. I would say they've totally made it. I'm delighted to be their colleague as we play together now. One is Liesl Depp, who did her doctoral degree with me at the University of Toronto. She's a phenomenal player. She plays in the Windsor Symphony, and also teaches at the university there. And she often will play. She'll often be a guest with us in Hamilton, and she also plays with me in Toronto fairly often. So she's a great colleague, ex-student, now colleague. Another is Tristan Jury.
I taught him composition, actually.
So we share some students. Well, Tristan did his master's, and he's well through his doctoral degree at University of Toronto, and is now I refer to him as a past student and a colleague, and very busy in the Toronto music scene, and again, a beautiful, beautiful musician, and a joy to play with. Derek, who wrote in earlier, I mentioned Derek plays, and I believe still plays, in the Royal Canadian Air Force Band in Winnipeg. So he's also making his living playing music. And Derek also plays the bagpipes brilliantly. Derek, I miss you, so I don't get to see you around here so often. I'd like to also mention Layla Roberts. She's another student and ex-student, great friend and colleague who plays often with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, teaches at the University of Manitoba. And I'm trying to think who might be listening from Colombia, but one ex-student there, Paula Alarcon, teaches in Bogota, in the university.
That's right. That's it.
Is it?
Yes.
Hi, Paula. At any rate, so those are some. I'm sorry to those of you that I've missed, and truly my students are a great joy, and I think the world of them.
We actually have another one watching here. Christina Lee says, a former student of Leslie's from Mohawk here, and has a question for you. What is your favorite thing about teaching the flute?
It's the interaction with the students. That is a great honor, actually, to learn from them and try and share what I've learned with them over 4 years together. Often, this is a very close and it's a special relationship. I feel like there's a lot of trust involved. When I think back to my teachers, it's a number of years. It's many years now, I have to admit, since I was a student in a university or a conservatoire, and those interactions, those years with those teachers still shape my day-to-day life hugely. Hugely. The kindness and support and wisdom that these great teachers have shared, it has shaped my life in too many ways to be able to say, but to try and do that with my students is, that's a great honor, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do it.
That's lovely. Now, you teach at U of T, and you mentioned that the connection with your students is so important. What happened with when classes were canceled? Did you continue with your teaching?
I did, Abby. So I just put my flute down. classes were canceled and lessons were canceled and juries and recitals were canceled. I spoke with my students and said to them that if they wanted to migrate to an online platform and continue lessons, we would do it. And all of them were game to try. And so we played around with Zoom, with FaceTime, with Skype, just to find what platform was going to work best. And we continued with our lessons through till the day that they would have had either their recital or their jury. And I had little classes where they played for each other, so they felt like they still could perform a piece that they'd been working on all year before putting it to rest. So there wasn't that sense of complete loss in terms of the performance of this music. And also, one of my students had set up a master class that was to take place in early May in person. And I just assumed it would be canceled, Abby. But in fact, she organized it. A big shout out to you, Min, if you're listening. It was extraordinary. Min not only kept it going but expanded it. So she set up this class. We did it over Zoom. It started in the early afternoon in England with some students in London. Then it came back to Toronto for some students here, and then it went to Hong Kong. And late evening we greeted some students in Australia in their early morning. So it was sort of a really interesting, I guess, illustration of what we can do online that we certainly can do live.
Yeah, oh, that's amazing. That's something you might want to keep going with anyway, to get that connection with people from different countries. That's fantastic.
It was great for them,
Now,
sorry,
yeah,
it was great for them because they wouldn't normally have the opportunity to all hear each other. So that was a very fun thing.
Of course. And I'm glad you managed to have that happen. I feel so bad for the performance students, especially, who work so hard and everything is so focused towards their final recital, and then they're all canceled. It makes the whole thing seem completely futile. I teach composition at U of T, and our classes were canceled the same day as the final composer's concert. So all of those pieces that had been written for the concert didn't happen, and these students didn't hear them. So that was really difficult. All of the attendance marks went out the window. They weren't counted anymore, and then everything was just emailed in for a final mark. So rather impersonal, but still possible. It'll be interesting to see what happens in September if we go back to classes. It's looking like perhaps we won't right away.
It does look that way. Yes, we're all having to learn to be a bit nimble and find ways to do what we do that we would never have expected. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of school, you have quite an impressive training. You went to U of T for your undergrad, and then Yale for your master's, and then further studies at Juilliard. And one of our audience members in the advanced survey obviously knows your bio and asked you what it was like to study at Juilliard.
It was great. I think it was really great. Sometimes I've heard people say that it's a bit cutthroat and intense, and because I came to it at the end of my formal studies, had I gone there as an undergrad student, I probably would have dissolved. But because even Toronto seemed like a huge leap from central Alberta, where I grew up. But going there near the end of my studies, I was quite self-motivated, and I went there specifically because I wanted to continue my studies with Julius Baker. And so it was great. He was in his later years as a teacher there at the time. and had a lot of time for his students and so much experience and wisdom to share with us. And being in New York was exhilarating in every way. So it was wonderful.
Mhm. And by the time you were at Juilliard, you'd already had some incredible successes. I think you won the CBC competition when you were at Yale, I believe, and I believe you've already performed as soloist with the TSO when you were 18, right? Those are really, really phenomenal accomplishments. Now, I have a question for you. Do you see it differently today for young people? I mean, I think those early career accomplishments mean so much in actually starting the career, right? It's so difficult to get that career started. Are they around today? I know for composers, the CBC used to be very important to us. There was a CBC competition. Also, we had the CBC show 2 New Hours, which was so important in showing Canada, you know, the up and coming talent. Now we have to find different ways to start a career. Is it the same for performers?
I think that the shift in CBC radio has been huge for us. You mentioned 2 New Hours. Yeah, I mean, I remember listening to this. Always, there were so many programs we could tune into where we would hear our colleagues and where we had the opportunity to perform often. And so I think this level of this platform not being there is a huge loss. However, on the other hand, especially in a place like Toronto, there are so many performance opportunities for students, and they really seize them, not only seize those that are available, but create more for themselves. They're so creative and so just full of energy. And I see them at all the new music concerts of Continuum and Esprit and new music concerts. So there's still, I think, an enormous amount of energy, but on a national platform, what we had through the CBC, through CBC radio, is, I think, something that all of us miss hugely. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We all feel it. Now, let's have some questions about you as an HPO player. Now, I believe you've been with the HPO for 12 years. Does that make sense? And I wonder about your role as principal flute. So, what do you do as principal flute that we might not know of as audience members?
Well, you know, I just try and keep my section happy and make my section happy. But I mean, to be serious, there may be uncertainties in the score or between the parts sometimes that, can be resolved within the section, that don't need to take orchestra time or need to take our amazing music director's time. And so I can make a lot of those calls, perhaps in conversation with the other principal players. And then once we've made a decision, handing those down the line. And those might be anything from different articulations to different dynamics. If we have intonation issues in the section, that might be something I try and deal with. It's not something that we need to spotlight very, very often at all. Something, I'm lucky to have fantastic colleagues, so they take care of that. We all try and take care of it amongst ourselves. But I think that we try and deal with any mistakes and things in the part without taking the full orchestra time and Gemma News time. So that might be something that I do. Phrasings amongst the principal wins, we make decisions about how we want to shape things. Perhaps we have different ideas, and so we come to a consensus. So those are some of the things that I do.
Right, and I'm sure that you're probably at the different auditions for woodwind players, and I know you're involved in committees like the Artistic Advisory Committee. So, from my perspective, there's a lot you do for the orchestra other than your performances.
Uh, Thanks, Abby. Yes, and I'm very happy to serve with you on the Artistic Advisory Committee. That's a great joy and a pleasure. So yes, offstage there are a lot of things that go into the season. Organizing the season, thinking in advance about guest artists we would like to have come in, and music that we would like to perform, pieces that we want to commission as an orchestra. Yeah, so there's a lot of collaborative work that goes on.
Now, I wonder about if you have any memorable moments with the HPO. I have a memorable moment of you, and it was actually the very first concert where I was composer in residence for the orchestra. And at that point, I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting and watching. But you were performing the Mozart Flute and Harp Concerto with Erica Goodman. Also on that concert was Jamie Somerville performing the Horn Concerto by Omar Daniel, and it just felt like a wonderful place to be. So that's me. What
I'm sorry, Abby, we had a little cutout there, so I didn't hear the end of your question.
Oh, just what is maybe you can tell us one or two of your memorable moments playing with the HPO, either as soloist or in the orchestra.
Well, I've had some opportunities to perform concertos, as you mentioned, and those are always exciting and exhilarating and challenging. And but one that comes to mind just because of its unusual situation, and it was quite recent. In fact, I think it was the very opening of this season. I sometimes get mixed up, but yeah, September of this season that we're just coming to the end of. I played Syrinx within the broader orchestral repertoire that was happening, but I played it from somewhere up in the lighting infrastructure of our hall. And once I was there, I felt pretty secure as long as I didn't lean forward. But on the way up and on the way down, it was definitely a little bit tricky. I felt a bit like an acrobat going up there. So that is a memorable experience for me.
That was very special. That was in, yes, our opening night concert this year in Radiant Ravel. And it was quite neat how, it looks like it's a wooden wall, and then the door opens up there, and you just appeared on high. That was was really neat. Wow.
I'll tell you, Abby, you asked me earlier how different it was for me preparing for this performance today. You just reminded me, or we between us just reminded me of an anxiety dream I had about this performance. And it's not like I've never had anxiety dreams before. Perhaps some of my other colleagues listening are also familiar with this type of thing, but normally mine are quite predictable. So I had a dream leading up to today, just a night or two ago, that I've never had before, where I was asked to play it. Actually, our past executive director, Diana Weir, appeared in my dream and said, "Leslie, we thought it would be wonderful if you could perform the Dohnanyi Passacaglia. We're going to put you in this harness and we're going to dangle you from the top of the stage, and you're just going to play it hanging there in front of the audience. and
That's
I was happy to wake up and find out that was
that's a good one. You know, oddly enough, that same concert, you know, I had a new piece with The Mermaid and the Fisherman with Stacey Dunlop, soprano, and our own Michael Fedician playing trumpet. And Stacey Dunlop has done a number of things like that, where she sings in operas and she's hanging upside down and in harnesses. And oh my goodness, quite something. So that actually exists. Well, you know, you might get asked to do that in future. Now, well, I think we've lost Leslie for a moment here, but our next question for her revolves around the intimate. I can hear you, Leslie. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll just.
Our next question revolves around our intimate. Oh, okay, great. Well, we can hear you. We have a question from Grace, who said, I really enjoyed the up-close audience interactive concert a few years ago at the Studio Theatre. And that, by the way, is our intimate and immersive series, and it still goes on. It'll be at the Cotton Factory. And she asks about the recovery from your finger injury, remembers that from some years ago. How is your finger?
Oh, my goodness. Well, thank you, Grace. And I'm sorry I've disappeared. I'm not sure what's happened, but that's okay. Yes, that was actually December of 2 years ago, Abby. I broke my finger. I broke my left index finger, and it has recovered very well. In fact, it has taken until now to feel strong again. Not that it affected my playing, because that's not a finger that requires a lot of strength or a lot of dexterity, just speed, but not it's not moving around, just up and down. So it luckily I didn't have to cancel concerts because of it. But I kept it in a splint all the time I wasn't playing. But now it feels strong, and it feels it has healed very well. So thank you for asking.
That's amazing. Now, I guess just one last question for you here, Leslie. You've pointed a few times towards Continuum and some of the other work you've done besides the HPO, and your list of other orchestras you've played with as a soloist and as guest principal flute is just wonderful. So I know you do a lot of work outside of the HPO. So one last question for you is, you know, do you sometimes dream of just having one job, or are you just fine with working for a lot of different organizations and the active lifestyle you have as a performer?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, Abby. And you know, this situation we are in puts into stark relief just how busy we often are. And I would not trade the vibrancy and the vast, what am I trying to say? I play with so many different groups, and so I get to enjoy working with different colleagues, being inspired by different colleagues. And each group that I play with makes me learn how to play my instrument in a different way, so that I think that they all help with everything I do. I'm very grateful for that. I do love it. I love the opportunity to perform as soloist, but I would never desire that over my orchestral playing. I think that I like that because it sort of forces me out of my comfort zone, and it helps me to stay on top of my instrument in a way that sometimes perhaps I wouldn't. So I'm grateful for all of it.
Well, thank you so much. We are so pleased to have you at the HPO. You're such an asset in so many ways. So I thank you very much for doing this interview and this performance today. It has meant a lot. Thank you very much, Leslie.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Abby.
So I do hope all of you will join us next Wednesday. It will be a special Get to Know the HPO History edition. We will be joined by HPO staff member Megan Norse, and she will go through our history, and we've got some fantastic photos from over the years. We do encourage you to get involved. We've got a survey link for you, and we ask you to send in your favorite memories and also email your favorite photos of things you may have or pictures from over the years. So next week will be really quite a different edition of Get to Know the HPO. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next Wednesday at noon. And once again, thank you so much, Leslie Newman. We have some lovely comments for you here, which we'll look at after the broadcast. Thanks very much, everyone. See you next week.